The morphine syrette felt lighter than it should in Private Jack Morrison's hand. He'd carried 6 into the Hürtgen Forest that morning. Now at 14:30 hours he had 1 left. The German soldier in front of him had lost both legs below the knee. His own platoon sergeant lay 15 yards back with a sucking chest wound. Both men were dying. Both needed the morphine to ease their final minutes. Jack's hands shook as he looked from one face to the other. His training said, treat your own first. His faith said, all men deserve mercy. The forest was quiet now after 3 hours of shelling, but that quiet wouldn't last. German reinforcements were coming from the east. American artillery would start again at 1500 hours. Jack had maybe 10 minutes to decide. He could save neither man's life. He could only choose who would die in less pain. The weight of that choice pressed down on him harder than his full combat pack ever had. Jack knelt in the mud between 2 worlds. To his left, Sergeant William Patterson. They called him Bull. He'd been with the company since Normandy. 6 months of combat. The man had pulled Jack from a burning half-track in September, saved his life outside Aachen in October. Now Bull lay on his back with a hole in his chest the size of a fist. Every breath made a wet sucking sound. Pink foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. To his right, the German, Jack didn't know his name, didn't want to know. The man wore the grey-green uniform of the Wehrmacht. His legs ended in ragged stumps just below the knees. The snow around him was red. He'd lost too much blood. His face was the colour of old paper, but his eyes were open. They watched Jack. They were brown eyes, young eyes, maybe 20 years old. Jack was 23. He'd been a medic for 8 months. Before that, he'd worked in his father's pharmacy in Pennsylvania. He'd wanted to be a doctor. The war changed those plans. Now he carried a canvas bag full of bandages and sulfur powder. Now he made choices no pharmacy school could prepare him for. The syrette in his hand held 1/2 grain of morphine tartrate, standard army issue. It looked like a toothpaste tube with a needle. You twisted the wire loop to break the seal. Then you jabbed it into flesh and squeezed. Simple, quick. It would ease pain for 3 to 4 hours. But these men didn't have hours. They had minutes. Maybe 20. Maybe less. The morphine wouldn't save them. It would just make dying easier. Jack had used 5 syrettes that morning. 2 on Private Collins after he stepped on a mine. 1 on Lieutenant Marsh when shrapnel took his arm. 2 on Corporal Davies. Davies had died anyway, screaming. Now Jack had 1 syrette left and 2 dying men. The math was cruel and simple. His training was clear. Treat American wounded first. Always. The manual said so. His drill instructor at Fort Sam Houston had said so. Every medic knew the rule. Your own men came first. It wasn't about nationality. It wasn't about politics. It was about survival. You kept your unit combat effective. You patched up soldiers who could fight again. You helped men who would help you. But Bull Patterson wasn't going back to combat. Neither was the German. These men were past helping. They were past fighting. They were just dying, and dying hurt. Jack looked at Bull's face. The sergeant's eyes were half closed. He was conscious but fading. His lips moved. No sound came out. Jack leaned closer. Bull's breath smelled like copper and rot. His chest wound gurgled. Then Jack looked at the German. The man's eyes met his. There was no hatred there. No anger. Just pain. Deep animal pain. His jaw was clenched so hard Jack could see the muscles jumping. The German's hands clutched at the frozen ground. His fingers dug into the dirt and dead leaves. Jack's father had taught him about mercy. Sunday mornings in their small church in Scranton, the pastor would read from the gospel. Blessed are the merciful. Do unto others. Love your enemies. Jack had believed it all. He'd believed it when he signed up as a medic. He'd believed it when he took his oath. He'd believed it when they handed him a Red Cross armband instead of a rifle. But belief was easier in peacetime. Easier in a warm church with sunlight through stained glass. Out here in the Hürtgen Forest with blood in the snow and shells screaming overhead, belief was harder. Out here, mercy had a cost, and someone had to pay it. A shell exploded 200 yards west. The ground shook. Jack flinched. His ears rang. The quiet was ending. The artillery barrage would start soon. When it did, this whole section of forest would turn into hell. Jack had seen it before. Trees exploding into splinters, earth fountaining into the air, men torn apart by steel fragments moving faster than sound. He checked his watch. It was 14:32 hours. He had maybe 8 minutes before the shells started falling here. Maybe less. Once the barrage began, he'd need to find cover. He couldn't help anyone if he was dead. Jack made himself look at both men again. Really look. Not as a medic sizing up wounds, as a human being seeing other human beings. Bull Patterson was 31 years old. Married, 2 kids back in Iowa. Jack had seen their pictures. A boy and a girl. The boy was 6. The girl was 4. Bull carried those photos in his helmet liner. He showed them to anyone who'd look. He talked about his farm, talked about planting corn after the war, talked about teaching his son to fish. The German soldier was a stranger. Jack knew nothing about him. He might have a family too, might have a wife or a sweetheart, might have parents waiting for news, or he might be alone. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was human. He was hurt, he was dying, and he was suffering. Jack's hands were still shaking. He looked down at the morphine syrette. The metal tube caught the grey light filtering through the shattered trees. It seemed to glow like something holy or cursed. He thought about his training, the classes at Fort Sam Houston, the instructors in their pressed uniforms. They'd taught him triage. They'd taught him to prioritize, save the ones who can be saved, comfort the ones who can't, move fast. Don't think too much. Thinking slows you down. Slowing down kills people. But they'd never taught him this. They'd never put him in a room with 2 dying men and 1 dose of morphine. They'd never asked him to choose who deserved mercy. Maybe they couldn't teach that. Maybe some choices were too hard to put in a manual. Jack's company had entered the Hürtgen Forest 6 days ago. Since then, they'd lost 43 men, dead or wounded, more than a third of their strength. The forest ate soldiers. The Germans had prepared defensive positions for weeks. Bunkers, minefields. Artillery zeroed on every trail and clearing. The American advance measured in yards, not miles. Every 100 feet cost blood. This morning's attack had been a disaster. They'd moved forward at dawn, made it maybe 200 yards. Then the German 88s opened up. Tree bursts. The shells exploded in the canopy overhead. Fragments rained down. Men died before they could dig in. The company scattered, found whatever cover they could, waited for the shelling to stop. Jack had been with Bull's squad, 9 men. When the barrage lifted, only 6 were still able to move. Jack had worked fast, bandaged what he could, given morphine to the worst cases. Then Bull took them forward. They had orders to secure a road junction another 100 yards ahead. They never made it. German machine guns caught them in the open. Bull went down first, took a burst across the chest. The rest of the squad dove for cover. Jack crawled to Bull through the mud and snow. He knew immediately it was bad. Chest wounds were killers, especially when they sucked. The hull was pulling air. Bull's lung was collapsing. Jack had maybe 5 minutes to seal it. He'd used his last occlusive dressing on Private Collins an hour before. All he had left was a field dressing and some sulfur. It wasn't enough. He did what he could, packed the wound, tied it tight, gave Bull water from his canteen. Then he heard the German. The man was crying, calling out in a language Jack didn't understand, but pain sounded the same in any language. Jack looked around. The rest of the squad had pulled back. He was alone with Bull and whoever was crying. He should have stayed with Bull. should have waited for stretcher bearers. But the crying didn't stop. It cut through the cold air like a knife. Jack found the German 20 yards away, half buried in leaves and snow. His legs were gone. An artillery shell had done it. One of the American shells from the morning barrage. The stumps were crude and terrible. White bone showed through red meat. The man had tried to use his belt as a tourniquet. It wasn't working. Blood still pumped out in weak pulses. Jack had frozen. For maybe 10 seconds he just stood there, looking at an enemy soldier, a man who'd been trying to kill Americans an hour ago, a man who might have killed Jack's friends. But all Jack saw was a kid his own age bleeding out in the snow. Training took over. Jack dropped to his knees. He pulled out tourniquets from his bag. Real ones. Rubber tubes with metal catches. He wrapped them high on the German's thighs, above the wounds, cinched them tight. The bleeding slowed, stopped. The German's crying faded to whimpers. That's when Jack realized what he'd done. He'd just used his last 2 tourniquets on an enemy soldier. He'd used supplies meant for Americans. If one of his own guys needed a tourniquet now, Jack had nothing to give. The thought made him sick, but he couldn't undo it. The tourniquets were on. The German's life was saved. At least for now. Except it wasn't saved. Not really. The man had lost too much blood. His pulse was thin and fast. His skin was cold. Shock was setting in. He'd die within the hour, maybe sooner, and there was nothing Jack could do about it. No plasma, no whole blood, no surgery, nothing but bandages, and a syrette of morphine. Jack had dragged the German to a more sheltered spot. Then he'd gone back to Bull. The sergeant was worse. His breathing was ragged. The pink foam at his mouth had turned to red, internal bleeding. Bull's eyes found Jack's face. He tried to speak. No words came, just a wet rattle. That's when Jack checked his aid bag. That's when he found he had only 1 morphine syrette left. That's when the choice became real. Now he knelt between them, frozen, unable to move forward or back. The seconds ticked past. Each one felt like an hour. Jack's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe he could split the morphine, use half on each man, but the syrettes didn't work that way. Once you broke the seal, you had to use it all. The needle would clog otherwise. Half a dose wouldn't do much anyway. It would just draw out the pain, make them suffer longer. Maybe he could run back to the aid station, get more morphine, come back. But the aid station was half a mile away, through forest still under German observation. It would take 20 minutes. Both men would be dead by then, or the artillery would start and Jack would die trying. Maybe he could do nothing. Let both men die without morphine, share the pain equally. But that wasn't mercy. That was just cowardice. Jack knew it. He could feel it in his gut. He had the power to help, to ease suffering, and he was choosing not to because the choice was hard. A branch cracked somewhere to the east. Jack's head snapped up. He listened, heard nothing else. Probably an animal, or a tree settling. But it reminded him that time was running out. German patrols would sweep this area soon, looking for survivors, looking for equipment, looking for Americans to capture or kill. Jack looked at Bull again. The sergeant's eyes were closed now. His chest barely moved. He was slipping away. Maybe he was already too far gone. Maybe the morphine wouldn't even register. Maybe he was past pain. But Jack had seen enough dying men to know that wasn't true. The body could be shutting down and still feel everything. Pain was stubborn. It lasted until the very end. Sometimes beyond. Then Jack looked at the German. The young man's eyes were still open, still watching. There was something in that gaze. Not pleading, not demanding, just waiting, like he knew what Jack was thinking, like he understood the choice Jack had to make. Jack tried to remember his enemy, tried to see this man as a soldier who'd kill Americans if he could. But all he saw was a broken human being. Someone's son, Maybe someone's husband, lying in the snow with his legs gone and death coming fast. His father's voice echoed in his head. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. But his drill instructor's voice was there too. Take care of your own, mission first. Unit cohesion. You're not a priest, Morrison. You're a soldier. Act like it. Both voices were right. Both voices were wrong. Jack was caught between them, between duty and compassion, between law and grace, between the easy answer and the right one. If there even was a right answer. Another shell exploded. Closer this time, maybe 100 yards. Jack felt the concussion in his chest. Dirt rained down through the trees. A thin branch fell and landed across Bull's legs. The sergeant didn't move, didn't react. He was too far gone. Jack realized he was crying. Tears ran down his face. They felt hot against his cold skin. He wiped them away with the back of his hand. His hand came away muddy. He didn't care. He was past caring about mud, past caring about cold, past caring about anything except the impossible choice in front of him. He thought about flipping a coin, letting chance decide. It seemed fairer somehow, random, impartial, but he didn't have a coin, and even if he did, it felt wrong, like cowardice dressed up as fairness. Some choices couldn't be given to chance. Some choices had to be owned. Jack made himself list the facts, tried to think like a medic instead of a man. Bull was closer to death. His breathing was worse. His color was worse. He might die in the next 5 minutes. The morphine might not even work in time. The German had more time. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe 15. The morphine would definitely work on him, would definitely ease his pain before the end. So from a pure efficiency standpoint, the German made more sense. The morphine would do more good there, would relieve more suffering, would serve its purpose. But Bull was American. Bull was Jack's sergeant. Bull had saved Jack's life. That debt mattered. Loyalty mattered. The bonds between soldiers mattered. If Jack couldn't honor those bonds, what kind of man was he? What kind of soldier? On the other hand, debt and loyalty shouldn't matter when it came to mercy. Mercy wasn't something you earned. It wasn't something you deserved. It was something you gave. Freely. Without condition. That's what made it mercy. If you only showed mercy to people who'd helped you, that wasn't mercy. That was just trade. Jack's head hurt. His thoughts chased themselves in circles. Every argument had a counter-argument. Every reason had a reason to doubt it. He was paralyzed by possibilities, frozen by fairness. There had to be an answer, had to be a way through this, but he couldn't find it. Time kept moving. Jack checked his watch again. It was 14:36 hours. 4 minutes had passed. He had maybe 4 minutes left. The artillery would start soon. He needed to move, needed to decide, needed to act. But he couldn't. His body wouldn't obey. His hand held the morphine syrette, but wouldn't move toward either man. He was stuck, caught, trapped between 2 dying soldiers and one terrible choice. A sound broke through his paralysis. Bull was trying to speak. His lips moved. Air whistled through his damaged chest. Jack leaned close, put his ear near Bull's mouth, heard something. Not words, just sounds. Wet, desperate. Then Bull's hand moved. It reached up, weak and slow. The fingers brushed Jack's arm. Held on. Jack looked at Bull's face. The sergeant's eyes were open, just barely. They found Jack's eyes. There was no anger there, no demand, just recognition. Bull knew Jack was there, knew Jack was trying to help. The hand squeezed, once, then went limp. Jack felt something break inside his chest. He bit his lip, tasted blood. He wanted to scream, wanted to throw the morphine away, wanted to run, but he didn't. He stayed. He held Bull's hand. He waited. The German made a sound. A low groan. Jack's head turned. The young man's face was twisted in pain. His back arched. His fingers clawed at the ground. The pain was getting worse. The shock was wearing off. His body was starting to feel everything. All the torn nerves. All the destroyed tissue. All the trauma. Jack knew what that meant. He'd seen it before. When shock wore off, pain came flooding back, like a dam breaking. It could last minutes, could last an hour, depended on how long the body held on. But it was always bad, always terrible. Men screamed, men begged, men tried to die faster just to make it stop. The German deserved mercy, deserved relief, deserved something to dull the agony. But so did Bull, so did every American soldier who'd bled in this forest. Jack's loyalty was to them. His duty was to them. He wore an American uniform. He fought for American freedom. He couldn't betray that, not even for mercy. Could he? Jack closed his eyes, tried to pray. The words wouldn't come. His mind was too loud, too full of fear and doubt. He opened his eyes again, looked at the morphine Syrette, looked at Bull, looked at the German, back to the Syrette. He thought about his father again. The pharmacy back in Scranton, the smell of medicine and old wood. His father behind the counter in his white coat, mixing prescriptions, helping people. Jack had watched him work since he was a kid, seen him give medicine to anyone who needed it. Rich or poor, friend or stranger, his father didn't discriminate, didn't judge, just helped. One day Jack had asked him why. Why help people who couldn't pay? Why help people who'd never thank him? His father had smiled, said medicine wasn't about payment, wasn't about gratitude. It was about need. Someone needed help. You had the skill to give it. That was enough. Jack had loved that answer, had carried it with him through pharmacy school, through medic training, through 6 months of war. It had guided him through dozens of aid stations and hundreds of wounded men. Need was enough. Pain was enough. You helped because you could. But what happened when you couldn't help everyone? What happened when need exceeded supply? When pain was everywhere and mercy was limited? His father had never told him that. Maybe his father didn't know. Maybe no one knew. Maybe that's why this choice felt impossible, because it was. Thunder rolled in the distance. Not thunder, artillery. The American guns were starting. The barrage would walk east, toward German positions, toward this spot. Jack had maybe 2 minutes, maybe less. He needed to choose, needed to act, needed to be a medic or a soldier or a man, something, anything. His hand moved, almost by itself. The morphine Syrette felt heavy now, like it weighed 100 pounds. He brought it close to Bull's arm. The sergeant's sleeve was already rolled up from earlier treatment. The skin was pale, cold. Jack positioned the needle. His thumb was on the tube, ready to squeeze. One motion. That's all it would take. One squeeze and Bull would have relief, would die easier, would be at peace. But Jack couldn't do it. His thumb wouldn't press, his hand wouldn't move. He stayed frozen with the needle an inch from Bull's skin, frozen by guilt, by doubt, by the weight of consequences. He pulled back, turned to the German. The young man's eyes were still watching, still waiting. Jack moved toward him, brought the needle close. The German's arm was bare. His uniform sleeve was torn away. The skin was dirty and cold, but it was there, waiting. One injection, one squeeze, that's all. Jack's hand shook. The needle wavered. He couldn't do this either, couldn't choose the enemy over his own, couldn't betray Bull, couldn't betray his country, couldn't be that man. He pulled back again, sat between them, the morphine Syrette still in his hand, unused, useless. He was failing them both, failing as a medic, failing as a human being. The artillery was closer now. Jack could hear individual shells, could track them by sound. They'd impact this sector in less than a minute. He needed to move, needed to find cover, needed to save himself. But he couldn't leave. Not without deciding, not without finishing this. Bull's hand moved again. Weak, slow, it reached toward Jack. The fingers uncurled. Jack took the hand, held it. It was cold and rough, coldest from farm work and weapons. It squeezed back just barely. Then Bull's lips moved. He was trying to say something. Jack leaned close again, listened. One word, barely a whisper, but Jack heard it, clear and soft. Go. Bull was telling him to go, to leave, to save himself. The sergeant knew time was up, knew the artillery was coming. He was giving Jack permission, permission to run, permission to live, even if it meant dying alone and in pain. Jack's chest tightened. Tears blurred his vision. He squeezed Bull's hand. Tried to say something. Couldn't. His throat was closed. He managed a nod. Bull's eyes closed. His face relaxed slightly, like a weight had lifted. The first shell hit. 200 yards northwest. The explosion shook the ground. Trees splintered. Jack felt fragments whip past overhead. The barrage had started. He was out of time. He had to choose now or die trying. His training screamed at him. Treat your own. Bull was your own. Bull saved your life. You owe him. Give him the morphine. Honor the bond. Do your duty. His faith whispered back. Love your enemies. Show mercy. The German is suffering too. He deserves peace. He deserves comfort. You have the power to give it. Don't withhold it out of hate. Jack looked at Bull's face. The sergeant's eyes were closed. His breathing was almost gone. Barely a flutter. He was minutes from death. Maybe less. The morphine might not even work in time, might be wasted. But at least Jack would have tried, would have honored his duty, would have shown loyalty. Then Jack looked at the German. The young man's eyes were wide, full of pain. His teeth were clenched. Blood was on his lips where he'd bitten through. He was trying not to scream, trying to die with dignity. But the pain was winning. Jack could see it, could feel it, could almost taste it. Another shell. Closer. 100 yards. The sound was deafening. Jack's ears rang. Dirt and wood fragments rained down. A splinter caught his cheek. Blood ran warm. He ignored it, stared at the morphine in his hand. 1 dose, 2 dying men, 10 seconds to decide. His father's voice came back, clear and calm. Medicine wasn't about payment, wasn't about gratitude. It was about need. Who needed it more? Who would suffer more without it? That was the question. Not who deserved it, not who'd earned it. Who needed it? Jack looked at Bull. The sergeant's suffering was almost over. His body was shutting down. The pain was fading with consciousness. He was slipping away, peaceful, quiet. Maybe he was already past feeling. Maybe he was already gone, and his body just hadn't stopped yet. Then Jack looked at the German. The young man was completely alert, completely aware, feeling everything. The pain wasn't fading. It was growing, building, consuming. He would die in agony, would spend his last minutes in hell, unless someone stopped it, unless someone helped. Jack's hand moved. This time it didn't stop. This time it didn't hesitate. He crawled toward the German. The young man's eyes followed him. There was something in them now, not hope. Hope was too strong, but maybe relief, maybe understanding, maybe gratitude. Jack rolled up his own sleeve, found a vein in the German's arm, thin and blue beneath pale skin. He positioned the needle, twisted the wire loop, broke the seal. The morphine was ready. 1 squeeze, that's all it would take. His thumb pressed down. The morphine flowed into the German's bloodstream, into his system. The young man's eyes closed. His body relaxed. Just slightly, just enough. The morphine was working. The pain was easing, not gone, but dulled, manageable, bearable. Jack pulled the empty syrette away, dropped it in the mud. It was done. The choice was made. He'd given mercy to an enemy. He'd chosen the German over Bull, over his own sergeant, over his duty. He'd broken the rules, betrayed his training, maybe betrayed his country. But he'd stopped suffering. He'd given relief to someone who needed it, someone who would have died in agony without it. That had to count for something, had to mean something, even if it was wrong, even if he'd regret it, even if he'd pay for it later. Jack turned back to Bull. The sergeant was still breathing, barely. Jack took his hand again, held it tight, leaned close, started talking, quiet, soft. He didn't know if Bull could hear him, didn't know if it mattered, but he talked anyway, about Iowa, about Bull's kids, about planting corn, about fishing, about going home. Bull's breathing slowed, stopped, restarted, stopped again. His hand went limp in Jack's. His chest stopped moving. It was over. The sergeant was dead, gone, joined the 43 others the forest had taken from their company. Jack sat back, still holding the dead man's hand, still talking, even though there was no one to hear. Another shell hit. 50 yards. Trees exploded. Fragments sang overhead. Jack didn't move, didn't care. Let them come. Let the shells take him too. At least he wouldn't have to live with this choice. But the shells didn't come. The barrage walked past, heading east, toward German lines. The explosions faded into the distance. The forest went quiet again. Just the wind in the broken trees. Just the snow falling soft and cold. Jack finally let go of Bull's hand, laid it across the sergeant's chest, closed the dead man's eyes, said a prayer. It felt hollow, empty, words without meaning, but he said it anyway, because it was all he had left to give. Then he turned to the German. The young man was still alive, still conscious. The morphine had done its job. His face was calm, not peaceful, but calm. The pain was there but distant, manageable. He looked at Jack. Their eyes met. The German's lips moved. He said something in German. Jack didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was thank you. It was gratitude. It was recognition of mercy given. Jack nodded. Couldn't speak. Couldn't trust his voice. He checked the German's tourniquets. Still tight. Still holding. Not that it mattered. The man had minutes left. Maybe 10. Maybe 5. But they'd be easier minutes. Gentler minutes. The morphine would carry him through. Jack stood. His legs shook. His whole body shook. From cold. From fear. From exhaustion. From guilt. He picked up his aid bag. It was almost empty now. No morphine. No tourniquets. Just a few bandages and sulfur powder. Not enough to help anyone. Not enough to matter. He took one last look at Bull. At the German. 2 men who'd been enemies. Who'd tried to kill each other. Now they were just bodies in the snow. Death made everyone equal. Made everyone small. Made everyone forgotten. Jack turned west. Started walking. Back toward American lines. Back toward the aid station. Back toward whatever came next. His feet moved, one in front of the other. Automatic. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the last 15 minutes, questioning every choice, every decision, every moment. Had he done the right thing? He didn't know. Might never know. Bull was dead. The German would be dead soon. The morphine was gone. The choice was made. There was no going back, no changing it, no fixing it. But Jack couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop seeing Bull's face. Bull's hand reaching out, Bull's last word. Go. The sergeant had released him, given him permission to save himself. Maybe that extended to the choice too. Maybe Bull would have understood, would have approved, or maybe not. Maybe Bull died thinking Jack had abandoned him, had chosen wrong, had failed. Jack walked faster, trying to outrun his thoughts, but they followed, stuck to him like mud, like blood, heavy and thick and impossible to shake. He thought about the Germans' eyes, the way they'd watched him, patient, waiting, not demanding, not begging, just accepting, like the young man had already made peace with death, already accepted it. The morphine hadn't saved his life, but it had given him dignity, had let him die as a human being instead of a screaming animal. Was that worth Bull's suffering? Was one man's dignity worth another man's pain? Jack didn't know. The math didn't work. The scales didn't balance. There was no equation that made it fair, no formula that made it right. Maybe that was the point. Maybe there was no right answer. Maybe some choices were just terrible, just impossible, just scarring. You made them because you had to, because someone had to, because standing still and doing nothing was worse than choosing wrong. Or maybe that was just Jack lying to himself, justifying the unjustifiable, making excuses for betrayal. He'd given comfort to an enemy, used resources meant for Americans, broken his oath. That was the fact. Everything else was just rationalization. Jack reached a stream, frozen. He crossed it, kept walking. The forest looked the same everywhere, broken trees, snow, mud, death. He'd been fighting in this forest for 6 days. It felt like 6 years. Every day blurred into the next. Every fight looked like the last. The only thing that changed was the names of the dead. He heard voices ahead. American voices. He called out, identified himself, gave the password. 3 soldiers appeared, privates from another company. They looked at him, looked at his Red Cross armband, looked at his empty aid bag. One of them asked if he had morphine. His buddy was hit, needed something for the pain. Jack shook his head. No morphine, no supplies, nothing. The soldier's face fell. He cursed, turned away. They kept moving east, toward the fighting. Jack kept moving west, away from it. The aid station was in a bombed-out farmhouse. The roof was gone. 2 walls were missing. But it had cover, had some protection. Medics and stretcher-bearers moved between wounded men laid out on the dirt floor. Someone was screaming. Someone else was praying. Someone else was silent and still. Jack found the senior medic, Sergeant Reynolds, told him about Bull, about the German, about the morphine. Reynolds listened, didn't interrupt. When Jack finished, Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, then he put a hand on Jack's shoulder. Reynolds said. Jack did what he could. Said there was no right answer in a situation like that. Said every medic faced it eventually. Faced the choice between bad and worse, between duty and mercy, between rules and humanity. Said Jack would face it again. Would keep facing it until the war ended or he died. Then Reynolds handed Jack a fresh aid bag. Loaded, morphine syrettes, bandages, sulfur, tourniquets, all the supplies he'd need, told him to eat something, get warm, then head back out. They needed every medic they could get. The fighting wasn't stopping. The wounded kept coming. The forest kept taking its toll. Jack took the bag, nodded, went to a corner, sat down, opened a ration can. Couldn't eat. His hands were still shaking. He looked at the fresh morphine syrettes in his bag, 6 of them, little metal tubes full of mercy. He'd have to use them again, have to make choices again, have to decide who got relief and who got nothing. The thought made him sick, made him want to throw the bag away, walk away, go home, but he couldn't. Men were dying. Men needed help. That was enough. Had to be enough. Need was enough. Pain was enough. Pain was enough. You helped because you could, even when it destroyed you, even when it broke you, even when it left you hollow and scarred and questioning everything. You helped. That's what medics did. That's what Jack did. because someone had to. Because if he didn't, who would? He forced himself to eat, forced himself to drink water, forced himself to stand, to sling the aid bag over his shoulder, to walk back out into the cold, back toward the sound of shells, back toward the wounded, back toward the next impossible choice. The forest swallowed him. He walked east, toward the fighting. His boots crunched on snow and frozen leaves. His breath steamed in the cold air. His mind was quiet now, empty. He'd stopped thinking about Bull, stopped thinking about the German, stopped thinking about morphine and mercy and duty. He just walked. One step, then another, because walking was simple. Walking didn't require choices. Walking didn't hurt anyone. Walking just moved him forward, toward whatever came next, toward whatever the forest had waiting. He heard gunfire ahead, rifle shots, machine guns, the crump of mortars, a firefight, more wounded, more men needing help. Jack picked up his pace, started jogging. His aid bag bounced against his hip. He ran toward the sound, toward the need, toward the pain, because that's what he did. That's who he was. A medic, an American, a believer in mercy, even when mercy cost too much, even when mercy broke him, even when mercy left him wondering if he'd made the right choice, or any choice at all, or just let fear and doubt and faith and duty tear him in two. Jack reached the firefight, found cover, waited for a lull, then ran forward, toward the nearest wounded man, dropped to his knees, opened his bag, started working. Bandages, sulfur, pressure, words of comfort. The routine was familiar, automatic. It steadied him, gave him purpose, gave him something other than guilt. The wounded soldier was young, 18, maybe 17. He'd been shot in the leg. The femur was shattered. Jack could feel bone fragments through the flesh. It would need surgery, need a real hospital. But for now, Jack could stop the bleeding, could ease the pain, could give the kid a chance. He used a tourniquet, applied a pressure dressing, gave the soldier water. Then he reached for a morphine syrette, hesitated. His hand froze. He was back in the forest, back between Bull and the German, back in that impossible moment. The wounded soldier looked at him, waiting, trusting. Jack forced himself to move, twisted the wire loop, broke the seal, injected the morphine. The soldier's face relaxed, the pain eased. Jack had made the right choice. This time, but what about next time? What about the time after that? How many choices could he make before he broke, before the weight of mercy crushed him, before he lost himself in the gap between what he believed and what he did? Jack didn't know, didn't want to know. He just kept working, kept helping, kept moving. Because movement was life, stillness was death. If he stopped, he'd think. If he thought, he'd remember. If he remembered, he'd see Bull's face, the German's eyes, the morphine syrette in his hand, the choice he'd made, the man he'd become. So Jack didn't stop. He finished with the wounded soldier, called for stretcher bearers, moved to the next man, then the next, then the next. He worked through the afternoon, through the evening, through the night. He used all 6 morphine syrettes, gave mercy to men who needed it. American men, his men, the men he was sworn to help. But every time he broke a seal, he thought of the German. Every time he squeezed a tube, he wondered if he'd made the right choice. Every time he eased pain, he remembered Bull's hand going limp in his. The weight never lifted. The guilt never faded. It just became part of him. Another scar, another wound that wouldn't heal. Days blurred together. Jack kept working, kept moving. The company pushed deeper into the Hürtgen Forest. They gained ground, lost ground, gained it again. Men died. New replacements arrived. They died too. The forest didn't care. It just kept taking, kept consuming, kept turning soldiers into casualties and casualties into memories. Jack learned to live with his choice. Not accept it, not forgive himself for it. Just live with it, carry it. Let it weigh him down but not stop him. He became quieter, more distant. The other medics noticed, didn't ask. Everyone carried something. Everyone had choices they regretted. That was just war. 3 weeks later, the company finally took the road junction. Bull had died trying to reach. It cost them another 18 men. Jack was there, treated the wounded, used up 2 aid bags full of supplies, gave morphine to 5 soldiers, made no impossible choices, just did his job, just helped where he could. When the fighting stopped, Jack walked back to the spot where Bull had died. He found it by memory. The trees were more broken now, more shelling had hit the area, but he recognized the shape of the ground, the fallen log, the shallow depression where he'd knelt. There was nothing left. No bodies. They'd been recovered, buried somewhere. Bull would be in a cemetery, the German probably in a mass grave. Both men were gone, erased. Like they'd never existed, like that afternoon had never happened. But Jack remembered, would always remember. He stood there in the snow, said another prayer. This time it didn't feel hollow. It felt necessary, like paying a debt, like honoring a promise. He didn't know what he promised. Maybe to remember, maybe to do better, maybe just to keep going, keep helping, keep showing mercy when he could. Because mercy was all he had, all any of them had. In a forest that took everything and gave nothing back, mercy was the only thing worth holding on to, even when it hurt, even when it cost too much, even when it left him broken and questioning and changed forever. Jack turned away, started walking, back toward the company, back toward the next fight, back toward the next wounded man. The forest closed in behind him, cold and dark and endless. But he kept moving, one step, then another, because that's what soldiers did. That's what medics did. That's what mercy required. And Jack Morrison, 23 years old, far from Pennsylvania and further from home, would give mercy as long as he could, as long as he had supplies, as long as he had strength, as long as he had anything left to give, because that was his choice. The only choice that mattered. The one choice he could make again and again without regret. To help, to heal, to ease suffering where he found it, no matter the cost, no matter the weight, no matter how it changed him. That was mercy, that was duty, that was faith. And in the Hürtgen Forest in the winter of 1944, that was enough.